Hello to everyone, and first of all, let me welcome you to this Imo Ocean Group webinar, and certainly on behalf of the IMO, welcome everyone online. My name's Andrew Birchenough, and I work here at the IMO headquarters in London in the Marine Environment Division in the Office for the London Convention Protocol and Ocean Affairs. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the webinar to you today, which comes part of a series of webinars that we're actually delivering through, we call the Imo Ocean Group, which is a group of IMO Ocean family organizations, IMO, WMU, IMLI, IOPC funds, and IMSO. And really that group is about sharing information and coordinating issues in relation to marine ocean governance and marine issues. And we've already held a number of webinars last year on ocean governance, one on, again, on marine litter, which was presented by Gazamp, and also on robotics and autonomous inspection and maintenance of hulls, which was a very successful one, very well attended, as will be the one today, I'm sure. And so I think really it gives me great pleasure to open this webinar, and the title today is No Space for Rubbish, and it's looking at research approaches to reduce pressures on marine litter in the Eastern Caribbean region. And obviously, I'm sure you know, very topical at the moment. We've just recently had the UN General Assembly declaration on a new global treaty for marine plastic litter. So it comes as a great information, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about what's happening in the Eastern Caribbean. And we very much look forward to the speakers. We've got a great array of speakers for you today. And so I'm very much looking forward to listening to this, and hope you enjoy it, and please feel free to engage as much as possible and ask lots of questions. So on behalf of the IMO, I'd really like to thank as well WMU for organising this webinar, and also the global Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute, which have put this webinar on. And with that, I'd like to hand over now to Professor Ronan Long, who's going to give you some more background and some further introductory remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, Andrew. Good morning to everybody here in mainland Europe, our colleagues in Africa, and of course, good evening to our colleagues in Asia, and we'd say a very special good evening to our primary sponsor at the Nippon Foundation in Japan that are joining us today for this webinar. As Andrew stated, this is the second of a series of webinars that we have organized here at the World Maritime University, and we're very pleased to talk about the topic of marine debris. This is one of 4 programs underway at the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute. The first of which addresses land to ocean leadership, and it's a PhD program. The second is on the empowerment of women scientists for the decade of ocean science for sustainable development. The third one Andrew made reference to, which is on robotics and inspection of shipping. And the fourth one addresses a very important global issue in a regional context, which is the Closing the Circle program, marine debris, Sargassum, and marine spatial planning in the Eastern Caribbean. I'd also like to say a very special thank you to Dr. Aleka Stephen O'Brien, who is our program principal investigator. Dr. Stephen O'Brien has a very distinguished CV. She worked previously for the Federal Agency of the Environment in Germany. She has many distinctions, academic distinctions, and since coming to the university, she has been the co-convener of Chapter 12 of the Global Ocean Assessment, which focuses on marine debris. She leads a very strong team here at the university, and 4 of her colleagues who are on our PhD students are going to present this morning. First and foremost, Roxanne Graham from Grenada, who's one of my own students, followed by Christelle Ambrose, thereafter Tricia Lovell, and fourthly, Sarah Mahedo from Trinidad and Tobago. My distinguished colleague, Professor Clive Schofield, will then open the session to questions and answers. And I would encourage everybody that's joining us from across the world to post your questions in the chat. And we've allowed 20 minutes for interactive dialogue. Before I turn the microphone over to Aleka, I have notice of a very important conference that's coming up, which is on this particular issue, and it's going to be hosted in the beautiful island of Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean. And that will take place from the 4th to the 7th of April. Again, we're going to stream it worldwide. And we're doing this in partnership with a whole range of regional and global bodies, including IMO, as well as our sponsors in Japan, the Nippon Foundation. So we hope that everybody will be able to join us at that webinar on the 4th through to the 7th of April. One for your diary. Okay, I think I can now turn the screen over to Dr. Aleka Stephen O'Brien. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ronan, and thank you very much also, Andrew. A very warm welcome, everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. Yeah, that should be it. Thank you very much for everyone for joining. Very warm welcome to all over the world. I am now giving a little introduction about our program and will outline some research output that we have already produced so far. I would like to take you now from the views of the virtual world to the Eastern Caribbean. Think about the crystal blue waters and the beautiful beaches. And unfortunately, I have to give you a bit of a bad message, because we know that in the Eastern Caribbean and the Caribbean as such, it has triple the amount of marine litter than any other region, than the global average. And whereas we know that this exists, we have a lot of knowledge gaps with regard to the sources, the impacts, and also the fate of marine litter in the region. And there are huge knowledge gaps with regard to socioeconomic impacts and overall how to combine these lot of pressures in the region with the really ambitious plans to establish blue economy policies moving forward. There has been a lot of work going on already in the region by, for example, the Cartagena Convention, and also IMO as well. The Caribbean is a special area in MAPA Annex 5, so there are certain restrictions with regard to waste from ships. But still, there's huge knowledge gaps and problems still prevailing. And we also know that probably 90% of the waste in the region come from land-based sources, 10% come from sea-based sources, but that's not entirely clarified yet how these percentages are. Something that is very, very clear is that this kind of pollution doesn't stand in isolation. We have a lot of pressure in the marine environment in the Eastern Caribbean. And with these kind of, unfortunately, quite grim measures, we have approached our research project that I'm presenting to you today. And this is the Closing the Circle program, which is, like Professor Long mentioned, sponsored and supported by the Nippon Foundation. We are looking at marine debris, and we are looking into not only the sources, but also measures how we can address it, together with Sargassum in the small island developing states in the eastern island chain of the Caribbean. And we understand that marine spatial planning might be a cross-cutting theme that serves as a red thread to really understand how we can develop measures. And what we're doing does not stand in isolation. Of course, we are working towards the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Agenda, but we are also very mindful of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. And we are particularly excited, and that's Andrew mentioned that already, that the new potential plastic treaty might be developed over the next 2 years. It's very ambitious, but we know that the Caribbean as such is a very white blanket. There's not a lot of knowledge going on or available. So we are really trying to serve the region, to also represent these kind of the small island states on a global scale. And what we're doing is that we have three foci, so it's marine debris, Sargassum, and marine spatial planning. We are doing research sort of as an umbrella function in the project, but then we also have 4 PhD students who have dedicated research in their own field, and they will talk about it later on. And we also have a research fellow working on marine spatial planning, and Sarah will talk about her research. Then we have on-site training. So far they have been unfortunately virtually, but we are planning to go live, like Professor Erlang mentioned. And something that's very important is stakeholder collaboration, to really hone in on the needs of the region and to not sit in the ivory tower and research, but to really understand how we can contribute to the measures in the region. And we're doing this by looking at 3 pillars. One is science and technology. The second is blue and green economic responses. And the third one is societal awareness. And something that is clear is that we need to understand how we increase the data and access to data in the region. And we will also move forward now understanding how we can harmonize monitoring, how other mechanisms such as remote sensing can help us as well with marinita monitoring. And then something that's quite important is to put a monetary value behind the pollution, and money talks, and we know this. So this is what we have started last year, and we will continue understanding the socioeconomic impacts of marinita in the region. We have looked at the role of adequate port reception facilities in the region. And we will now also focus on societal awareness and the role of awareness, not only by from people that live on the ground, but also key decision makers in national governments, but also regional and international governments. And sometimes it feels like small island developing states are only part, a very small part of the ocean governance puzzle, but they actually are a very good sounding board of how measures are being implemented and if they are effective. You can see it quite quickly. And in all of this, we believe that marine spatial planning is a really red thread throughout and can provide us a lot of help in structuring our responses. And the team that we need for this quite ambitious program is amazing. We have 4 amazing PhD candidates from the region, and which are supported by an amazing research team, both from the region, but also worldwide. And I would like to thank every one of them for their dedication and the time that they bring to the project and to serve this beautiful region and the amazing people that we have met so far. Something that, of course, if you're at the university is quite important is the research that we're doing. And we are actually doing it quite from a specialist point of view for the PhD students. But as a global research team, we have looked at the role of trade in governing plastics pollution. We looked at also how IMO and shipping plays an important part of that. We are also trying to aim how we can harmonize monitoring regimes in the region, for example. And we mentioned it already, of course, our focus is very much on how we can provide knowledge to the region and from the region onto the global stage for the new plastic treaty that hopefully will be commencing now in 3 months, the International Negotiating Committee. So we have done quite a lot of research and publication on these kind of topics, and we are very happy to share this with you. Nothing in research should stand in isolation, and I think we all at the university are very strong of the opinion that we need to be engaged in international processes. Like I mentioned, we have been active in the World Ocean Assessment, the second cycle, which finished last year, and then the third cycle, which will start now this month. Also, I have been delegate last week to the United Nations Environment Assembly, and I was extremely happy that actually the much more robust and ambitious resolution was chosen to move forward. And we are really dedicated to serve now this process through our research as well. We also have been engaged in the development of the Plastics Management Index, which was hosted and supported by The Economist, the journal, together with the Nippon Foundation. And in this plastic index, we realized that the small island developing states are very struggling behind with regard to waste management, for example, and that there's extremely little knowledge with regard to understanding how they're actually doing. So this is something that we also would like to further work on. We have people from the Imo Ocean working group on plastics, and Sarah has been working with IOC UNESCO on marine spatial planning. And now I'd like to take you to one of the results that we are having as part of our research. In our talks that we have, we always realized it was very anecdotal in the beginning that the papers we're using for the region are not written by regional researchers. They came from the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and then we realized maybe we need to have a look into these kind of questions. Is it really like us, or is it actually reality that the researchers are sort of parachuting onto the region rather than the region creates research on their own problems? And indeed, we were confirmed. We just recently published a paper on so-called parachute science on marine debris in the Caribbean region. We looked at whether and to what degree foreign researchers do research in the region, and then take these results with them, publish them, and we wanted to see whether local researchers were engaged. And if you look at the number, it is absolutely shocking to see that 79% of the peer-reviewed articles and the lead senior authors were researchers who did not come from the small island developing states. They did not even come from surrounding in the Caribbean regions. They came from Germany, UK, Norway, and the United States. So this has really strong implications for global equity questions, and also understanding that the research is conducted, whether it's suitable and tailor-made for the regional questions we're looking at. And it is not. So this is what we call parachute science or colonial science. And it's something that I think we need to be aware of in moving forward for the plastics treaties. If we use always research from the global north to have solutions for the global south, this will not work. It will not work in dumping, shipping, fisheries. So this is something we would like to highlight. And the recommendations we made is that how to include local researchers, how to strengthen South-South collaborations, and so forth. And we also highlight the role of universities. Like CERMIS, it's a regional university in the Caribbean, and the World Maritime University in overcoming these kind of divides with the global South and North questions. What we realized is that there's a lot of need in the region also to further work on certain specific types of questions. So we had, unfortunately, due to COVID, there were online 2 workshops, one on marine spatial planning in the OECS region, and Sarah will talk more about it. We have plans to continue this training in person. And then we also had a socioeconomic assessment workshop together with Dr. Justin Ram, who's a former director of the Caribbean Development Bank, and the worldwide experts from the University of Wollongong to quantify the economic cost associated with pollution. This is a huge field of work, and we are really aiming now to move forward with this one. We also had a webinar series where we talked about ecological, ecotoxicological effects of plastics. We talked about the work of IUCN, the Marine Conservation Without Borders, who also highlighted the role of languages in raising awareness. It cannot be just English as a main language. We need to make sure that every different group is represented. And we also talked with the UNFCCP group from Jamaica, who are implementing this regional action plan on Marinetta. So you're more than welcome to have access to these recording as well. And now just to move ahead, and Ronan, Professor Long mentioned that already, you're more than warmly welcome to join us in Dominica virtually for our regional conference, where we are really trying to work together with regional and local people on the needs that the region has. And we are more than happy also to have a dialogue with you online to understand what the research needs are and where we can contribute with our project in moving forward. And with this, I'd like to thank you very much. And I'd like to also thank the amazing team at the World Maritime University. It is a pleasure to work with you every day. Thank you very much. Oh, and I hand the floor over to Roxanne. Thank you.
All right, good day, everyone. My name is Roxanne, and I'm here to talk briefly about the experiences and lessons I've learned thus far from assessing marine debris management across boundaries. So there are four main topics I want to cover, including geographic orientations in marine litter management, usefulness in regional collaborations, regional collaboration and policy coherence, and the diffusion of global initiatives in small island developing states. So I'll first start off with geographic orientations in marine litter management. So thus far, the direction in which my research thesis is going seems to be based on these varying geographic orientations, which in terms of marine litter management is often used to analyze legislation and strategies at the global or international, the regional level, or the national or local levels, like you see here in the diagram. So marine pollution has received considerable global attention in recent years. And according to Stefan O'Brien in 2015, the topic of marine litter is infiltrating its way more and more into science and politics and society. So now on a global level, the global community has adopted a series of environmental conventions to protect the seas and oceans, such as the London Convention, MARPOL, which actually stands for the International Convention for the Protection of Pollution from Ships, or even the Regional Seas Program, which stands for a lot when it comes to the various oceans across the world. Now, at the regional level, it is often referred to as this essential link that connects the international with the national, and it plays a key role in ensuring there's harmony and coherence in planning and coordinating, so that countries in the region can aim to have this one common or one set of common objectives. And then these overarching goals and objectives need to be actually tailored, like I said, further to fit, be more practical for the country itself. Now, here is where the problem comes in, particularly with small island developing states that tend to collaborate with countries and regions that are more developed. They adopt these similar aims, yet their infrastructure, resources, and in general, their overall capacity cannot readily facilitate achieving these aims. And so my research has already started looking at the gaps and opportunities on an interregional level. Interregional collaborations are now essentially this emerging and beneficial way to achieve the higher global objectives like those of the Regional Seas Program. And this is what my presentation focuses mostly on today. So let's start off with the benefits or the usefulness of regionalization. And one of the ways I can explain to you the usefulness of regional collaboration is through a paper that was produced by the ladies of the Closing the Circle program and published with a Marine Pollution Bulletin on Parachuting Science in the Eastern Caribbean. My contribution to this paper was mostly based on north to south, south to south, and triangular cooperation as a recommendation to strengthen the knowledge base, and other opportunities, of course, regarding dealing with marine litter in the Caribbean small island developing states. And the best way I can describe North-South cooperation is the one in which most people are familiar with, whereby, these rich countries that are geographically north provide some form of support, usually financial aid or some form of resources to help developing or poor countries, which are mostly southern parts of the the globe, help them build their capacity. And this is certainly needed for small island developing states of the Caribbean, who, yes, is responsible for the trash, but at the same time is not responsible for the trash that comes via ocean currents from the larger countries, and that is via the North Atlantic gyre. And regarding South-to-South collaboration, this one is all about the sharing of transferable skills, innovation, ideas among, the developing regions and the countries. We made specific suggestions to the UNEP ROLAC. ROLAC there stands for the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. So we made these specific suggestions that, regarding the Interagency Technical Committee, the ITC, which has a clearinghouse mechanism, sort of like this mega treasure chest of information regarding the environment. And we suggested that this can serve as a forum for the exchange of, a variety of things like technologies, expertise, experiences, opportunities, best practices, methodologies, advisory services, training that is available, in countries and islands of the South. And there's lots to learn from each other, and having a central forum to even access these in the first place would certainly be useful. And with triangular cooperation, it is just ensuring that these two, the North-South cooperation and the South-South cooperation, are effective, going forward. All right, so now I will talk about coherence, which is very important when we talk about regionalization. So this diagram essentially shows the central themes of a paper that I'm currently revising to be published. It's on policy coherence and interregional collaboration. It highlights the main categorization of marine debris management, and these were used as the basis to assess the current plans and activities for marine litter management in the wider Caribbean and Northeast Atlantic. You may notice that each management activity has these little indicators, like progress reports for monitoring or changes in consumption patterns on the prevention. And these indicators were essentially identified as the ones, most applicable at the moment for monitoring progress on a national and even on a regional scale. So a little more about my paper. It is specifically titled Achieving Greater Policy Coherence and Harmonization for Marine Litter Management in the Northeast Atlantic and wider Caribbean region. Yes, it's a mouthful. These two regions fall under the Regional Seas Program and has formalized an agreement via the OSPOR Convention and the Cartagena Convention in, collaborating to deal with marine litter. And in assessing the plans, which by the way were made all the way back in 2014, in assessing these plans, I actually used a scoring methodology against the same categories as I mentioned previously, right, the management activities, and found that prevention and removal target, the beginning and the end respectively. But when it comes to reducing marine debris and mitigating its impact, unfortunately, the WCR needs to, when I say WCR, I'm talking about the wider Caribbean region. Essentially, the region needs to significantly improve in its removal plans and efforts, while the Northeast Atlantic needs to be more explicit in its plan for preventive measures, indicating that the two regions, can be more coherent in these domains. I did know the challenges associated with the plans, though. In particular, the Northeast Atlantic, the countries under OSPOR have actually very individualistic approaches that contribute to, this grander entity, which is the Annex 1 of OSPOR Convention and the waste hierarchy as set out in the waste framework directive. And then actually prevention, in fact, is one of the highest priority. And regarding the wider Caribbean region, removal efforts are difficult and expensive in the Caribbean, especially as it is a region frequented by natural disasters. There were notable commonalities, such as both regions are under similar global initiatives like the Basel Convention, London Protocol, MARPOL, and a host of others. And they are very explicit in most of their management activities. A key takeaway from this research is that the wider Caribbean actually needs to address the lack of an implementation timeline and propose a structured reviewing process, right? OSPA right now is actually updating their plan, I think, to be released this year. And perhaps my categorization and, the collaboration with OSPA can, help them to further explore this in this regard. So I won't stay too long on this topic, as it's a recent outcome on a study that I'm doing on top-down approaches and analyzing, the overall chain of implementation in the Windward Islands when it comes from, global all the way down to local initiatives and activities. So this research applied an approach to translating international initiatives to the local context via the DIPSR framework. DIPSR stands for Driver Pressure Statement Impact Response, right? So this framework, using plans related to coastal and marine pollution, since we don't have plans established specifically for marine litter. So all of the information contained in this diagram that you see here came from these plans. And if you're unfamiliar with the DIPSR, it is essentially this pretty cool framework that helps you to think systematically, looking into these interlinks between cause, effect, and response. So in this case, it's anthropogenic driven activities, the impacts, and how it's being dealt with, right? And I've separated the responses on different scales, once again, from individual level to international initiatives. So this concludes my research. So a key takeaway message is that there are prospects to explore in interregional and even on an intra-regional level of collaboration. I will now pass you guys on to Ms. Christelle Ambrose from the Bahamas.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for that introduction, Roxanne. My name is Christelle Ambrose, and today I'll be talking about marine plastic litter and the wider Caribbean region, mainly focusing on the challenge of monitoring as a transboundary issue. So within the wider Caribbean region, it comprises of the insular and coastal states and territories in the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, within that region, we have our Caribbean SIDS, or small island developing states, who are more vulnerable to the impacts of marine plastic debris, because these nations in particular, they receive surges of ocean plastic debris on their coastlines that are greater than their population size, their consumption, and their production level of plastic. Now, the reason that this occurs is because within the wider Caribbean region, the hydrography influences marine debris movement, and this creates a transboundary waste issue, right? It makes the waste indiscriminate of where it lands. So this also creates a governance issue as debris crosses the scale, sectors, socioeconomic and cultural divisions within this space. And because of this movement of debris, this transboundary movement, it amplifies the need for synchronized global and regional monitoring of marine plastic debris so that we can inform better management strategies moving forward. Now, the reason that this debris moves as such within the region is due to currents associated with the North Atlantic gyre, which drive marine plastic debris deposition onto beaches within the Caribbean region. So much so, and Aleke touched on this earlier, that marine plastic debris concentrations on beaches within the Caribbean region are 3 times the global average. And from a lot of the work that I do, the plastic that you do uncover on these beaches are actually legacy plastics, things that date back as far as the 1950s, that are often stranded, buried, or resuspended onto these coastlines where they further persist as microplastics, which is another management issue in itself. And not only is this an environmental issue, right? But all of this marine debris that's landing itself onto shorelines within the region, it threatens over 37 tourism-dependent economies within the wider Caribbean region, right? And that's the main GDP for most Caribbean countries is tourism, as a lot of tourists frequent these beaches during their stay. So that can create a potential economic loss of up to $350 to $870 million annually for the region. Now, as it relates to monitoring, within recent years, there's been this global call to monitor for marine debris within the marine environment. In 2019, the United Nations Environment Assembly declared the need for high quality data and effective monitoring of marine litter, and that's inclusive of macro and microplastics. And they propose to do this through harmonized methodologies, right, where everyone is on the same page to enable better and more effective action against marine debris management. And in 2021, the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, or the Ocean Decade, they kind of compounded this with their aim to provide a common framework for the science we need for the ocean that we want, right, which targets data gathering within the marine environment. And SIDS are a focal point of that Ocean Decade, where they want more data to drive a clean, resilient, productive, and well-observed ocean. However, there's a challenge as it relates to SIDS being able to do monitoring. Now, when we think about the need to monitor for marine debris, especially within Caribbean nations, it's because plastic, we want to monitor for plastic, especially because plastic stranded on beaches is the most obvious sign of marine debris. And it really provides a straightforward and practical way to assess marine plastics. And the monitoring of these coastlines for marine debris, it can yield really important data on the spatiotemporal understanding of plastic and how it moves, the drivers, the impacts, and developing a standardized marine debris monitoring program is really critical for the region because we need that to build that regional scientific capacity, which the region actually lacks. And that's needed to support and measure policy interventions for marine debris in the region moving forward. Now, as it relates to monitoring efforts that are ongoing within the region, not much has been done. In 2014, the United Nations RAP-MALI, which is the Regional Action Plan for Marine Litter, it listed marine debris monitoring and research as a primary action category, but it offered limited to no guidance on how to actually execute that within the region. And current regional efforts for monitoring that exist happen episodically through the International Coastal Cleanup, which is usually volunteer and independently led. It has a limit on the quality control and the data that's collected, and it's not really a substantial or reliable tool for long-term monitoring. So what I wanted to understand with my research was, what was the approach to marine debris monitoring, harmonization, and coordination within the Caribbean region? So I conducted a literature review and did a comparative analysis to understand what had been done within the region as it relates to monitoring. So I reviewed 15 peer-reviewed articles on marine debris that was specifically, marine debris monitoring that was specifically done on beaches within the region from 1988 to the time of writing in 2021. And what I found was that 13 countries were represented within the region, including territories of the Netherlands, the UK, and France. And that included 360 beaches that were surveyed, with plastic being the dominant debris type, representing 93% of all debris collected, with a lot of that debris being transboundary debris that I discussed earlier. Now, when it came down to looking at the harmonization and coordination of these monitoring strategies, a lot of it was not uniform. When it came to selecting the site for which beaches were going to be surveyed, only 20% of these monitoring events actually followed a standardized protocol. And when we looked at the methodology for how this data was actually being gathered, 33% of it was unspecified, meaning that the researchers either created their own method or used a different method. 20% of it was a standardized protocol created by OSPAR and the IOC, and 13% of it was related to another monitoring program that's not necessarily used widely. When we looked at the transect measurements Again, there was no uniformity there, where you saw a lot of range between 5 meters or 100 meters sections of beaches that were being surveyed. So because of the disparity between that, it makes it hard to compare data to understand how debris is really accumulating on beaches across the region. And when we looked at how frequently these beaches were monitored, they weren't frequent at all. It was either 1 or maybe 2 sampling periods, and the sites were not replicated, right? So they were only studied once to look at the standing stock, meaning just counting what's on the site, versus doing an accumulation survey to see how often debris actually gathers at these sites. And understanding accumulation rates are really important, because it gives you the sufficient data that you need to understand where you should put your efforts as it relates to managing marine debris on particular beaches. Now, when we looked at the monitoring governance, it's very interesting to look at. When we look at how these monitoring activities were administered, 66% of them were conducted privately, either through research institutions, non-governmental organizations, and the remaining percentage was done by universities. So you see from the administration alone within the region, and Aleke talked about this as well, a lot of it was done by foreign entities and not led by government, right? And that's really important when we think about the need to govern and coordinate monitoring efforts within the region. When we looked at who was doing the monitoring activities, it was 100% researcher-led, maybe with some citizen scientists or volunteers mixed in. And when we looked at that data and how it was dispersed, only 13% of that was shared or stored within a cloud or in some protective site. And when we looked at how this research is being funded, only 40% of the research articles actually mentioned some funding source, and 20% of that funding came from government, universities, or research institutions, right? And as I move forward in this research, that's what I'm looking at now with this major call internationally by the UN for small island developing states to monitor. We have to beg the question, what is the cost benefit analysis of monitoring, and where does the funding come from to help small island states fund such research? So in summation, you know, there's a variation in the data collection methods that have been used, and that creates a big challenge for comparing and understanding the state of marine plastic debris across all these jurisdictions within the WCR, which will require political intervention. But we need a strong science policy interface to drive any policy to manage this issue at this regional scale. So we need coordinated and harmonized monitoring schemes that support this, as I just mentioned. And we need an interdisciplinary approach, you know, from the research and the peer-reviewed literature. You see that a lot of it is done by universities, by NGOs, and government is not necessarily included, and they need to be a key player as well as industry. So that's just the first part of my research. And like I mentioned, moving forward, I'm going to take this a step further to look at the financial aspects and what that means for our region. But if you want to learn more about this work, this is published, Coordination and Harmonization of Marine Debris Monitoring in the Caribbean Region, Identifying Strategic Pathways Forward. You can find that on Marine Pollution Bulletin. But thank you so much for your time. And I will pass the word to my colleague, Tricia Lovell.
Thank you very much, Crystal, and thank you to all the speakers who have gone before. And I would like to say how pleased I am to be part of this webinar today. And I do hope that the information that I will be sharing will be at least useful and educational for those who have joined us. Let me just switch to presentation mode. Okay, so once again, good morning and good afternoon to all who have joined us. I am pleased to present the elements of my research, which is concerned with the management of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in Eastern Caribbean small-scale fisheries, challenges to effective governance. So the area that I'm focusing on is the small island developing states of the Eastern Caribbean, most of which are highly vulnerable to both natural and economic shocks. Many of these countries are highly indebted and are challenged by a lack of human, financial, and resource capacity. These challenges can negatively affect the life and livelihoods of the most vulnerable within these islands. Based on my research, I'll be focusing specifically on small-scale fisheries. And for many, this term may evoke images of small canoes powered by hand, using low-tech equipment by fishers living in small coastal communities. However, in the global context, and certainly in the context of the region with which we are working, this is more a complex and variable issue. And they are largely, the outlook of a small-scale fisher is largely shaped by the local realities. So while there is no doubt that a fisher who is using a small open canoe on a Caribbean beach is considered a small-scale fisher, in the context of this region, so too are the sport fishers who is fishing with the use of a GPS, a fish finder, and with 6 wheels attached to the back of his vessel. Small-scale fishers in the Caribbean target a range of species using a variety of gear, from traps to nets to hand lines, long lines, and fads. The island's fleets are dominated by small coastal vessels, many of which are less than 12 meters in length. And while the contributions to the national GDPs are relatively small in a lot of the islands that we're working in, about 1% for many of these states, their significance to the national food security and livelihood protection of the communities in these islands cannot be understated. Small-scale fisheries connects generations of people through knowledge sharing of the practices that build environmental stewardship and collective action for achieving a sustainable future. And yet, even small-scale fisheries, like larger scale commercial and industrial fisheries, can negatively affect our environment. And this, not least of which, through abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear, also referred to as ALDFG. This includes both the full to partial gear types and components of gear that may be lost, abandoned, or discarded by fishers due to interactions with wildlife, weather, gear conflicts, and operational losses, among other reasons. This leading to threats to wildlife, habitats, safety of navigation, and of course the livelihoods and economic impacts to the fishers and who depend on these. While there's been a growing body of work of trying to understand the causes and impacts of ALDFG within the Caribbean, it is clear that there is a significant gap in our knowledge and understanding. However, based on local technical reports, there are some signals that it is in fact occurring within the region. A lot of what we understand about the issue of ALDFG is available in local technical reports by fisheries departments and agencies such as the FAO. Trap loss from tropical systems has been signaled as one of the major causes of loss within the Caribbean. As you can see from these numbers, in 1995, more than 12,000 traps were reportedly lost in Antigua and Barbuda alone due to a single hurricane. And in Dominica, over 4,500 traps were lost to 3 systems between 1999 and 2008. Which is a concerning, this is a concerning fact because it has been shown through research that derelict traps may continue to fish for more than a year once they have become derelict. There are also signals that other forms of gear have been lost at high rates. Nets, 79.2% of nets having been shown to be lost through work that was conducted by Matthews in 2010. And there are reports that FAD losses in some coasts of Grenada have been attributed to merchant shipping traffic. So while there's a gap in knowledge, there are signals that ALDFG is in fact occurring in the region. And so therefore there is really a need to understand this issue more. Now, the governance of ALDFG within the context of the Eastern Caribbean is actually achieved through a complex nexus of command and control provisions outlined in national and fisheries, marine pollution, waste management, or environmental protection laws, as well as through national, regional, and international environmental instruments and voluntary measures. At the international level, global initiatives such as the FAO voluntary guidelines on gear marking, as well as legally binding instruments such as the London Convention and Protocol and MARPOL Annex 5 are part of this nexus. However, their applicability and appropriateness to small-scale fishers is a question. The Caribbean is considered one of the most geopolitically complex regions in the world. And through several decades, a lot of the Caribbean has been working towards regionalism and collaboration and cooperation at multiple levels. And this has unfortunately resulted in an institutional maze of intergovernmental bodies, regional fisheries organizations dedicated to various aspects of ocean governance, often with overlapping or competing mandates and arrangements. There are three main intergovernmental organizations that have relevance to the region in which we're focusing on, which is the small island states of the Eastern Caribbean. The Association of Caribbean States, the Caribbean Community, and the OECS all have worked or signaled that their desire to cooperate in areas of ocean governance and or safeguarding the marine environment from pollution. Similarly, there are three major regional fisheries bodies, the CRFM, which is the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism, the Western Central Atlantic Fisheries Commission, and of course, ICAT, which is responsible for the conservation and management of Atlantic tuna. And more often than not, these bodies have been acted in an advisory capacity for the Caribbean islands that are member states of these, except in the case of the ICAT. The responses to the issue of ALDFG within these regional fisheries bodies has been largely, as I said, advisory, as evidenced through some recommendations that have been made by WCAFC and CRFM with regards to the needs for implementation of voluntary guidelines for marking of fishing gear, as well as urging for the development of the completion of regional action plans on IUU fishing. ICAT, as a management body responsible for tunas, has also set management recommendations. However, a lot of these recommendations, for a lot of the small scale fleets of these islands, they would not be covered by the recommendations, where the provisions do not apply to longline gear. Similarly, there are a number of other environmental regional bodies that have focused on various aspects of marine litter. The Caribbean Environmental Program and the Cartagena Convention, as the major regional seas program within the region, has developed regional action plan on marine litter, which is a voluntary framework. And I think Crystal has already spoken a little bit about some of the weaknesses that exist in the plan with regards to monitoring. Similarly, there are a number of gaps and weaknesses that exist within the plan as it regards the management of the ALDFG. The SPOR protocol, which is a protocol under the Cartagena Convention, has developed a marine mammal action plan where it has also signaled the need for cooperation and action on ALDFG in the management of the region's marine mammal population. However, the plan does not provide significant guidance on how this can be achieved. At the national level, the nexus of instruments is no less complex. You have a number of national command and control provisions for the management of fishing gear that are split or fragmented between various fisheries and other laws, such as solid waste management, environmental protection laws, and marine pollution laws. And even with this fragmentation, there is still a number of gaps that have been identified through my ongoing research in the ability for these national laws to effectively govern the issue of, or manage the issue of these ALDFG at the national level. Altogether, the issues identified so far signal some of the challenges to the effective governance of ALDFG in the Eastern Caribbean small-scale fisheries. Local uncertainties and major knowledge gaps about the drivers, scale, and impact of this threat may challenge policymakers and regional actors who seek to set effective management measures. The inherent complexities of multi-gear, multi-species fisheries will require the employment of a range of strategies, and for highly vulnerable states with limited capacities, garnering the political commitments for an issue that is, one, not well understood, and particularly in the current economic climate, would be a major challenge. Limitations exist in the applicability of some of the global instruments to small-scale fisheries, and there is a clear need to consider the policy coherence and mechanisms for integrated governance that take into account the complex nexus of bodies that are dedicated to conservation and management of marine litter, ocean governance, and by extension, ALDFG within the Caribbean region's marine space. At the national level, there are a number of weaknesses within the legislative framework that would also need to be addressed. ALDFG is a complex challenge, and if we are to achieve effective governance in the Eastern Caribbean small-scale fisheries, additional research is going to be needed to understand not only the scope and scale of the threat, but also barriers to improved management at all levels. If you would like to learn more about the issue of ALDFG at the global level, as well as within the Caribbean region, you may check out some of the references that I have provided in my presentation. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And at this time, I will turn the floor over to Sarah Mahadeho, who will be speaking about marine spatial planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Trisha. Let me just share my screen. Great, I think that's it. So thank you, Trisha, again. My name is Sarah. I'm a researcher on marine spatial planning in the Eastern Caribbean region. And my talk today would be on the potential of applying marine spatial planning for pollution control. So this is not my area of current research, actually, and unlike my colleagues, I will not present on the work that I'm doing, but addressing pollution control in MSV is actually quite a new and emerging area of study, both here and across the world. And so I will look at two recent frameworks which have come out and which may be applied. So first, I will remind you about what MSP is about, and then why addressing marine spatial planning is difficult in MSP, because it is. And then I will outline the two conceptual approaches. So essentially, marine spatial planning is a practical way to organize use of the marine space and the interactions between users to reduce conflicts amongst the various users and to create synergies. Through the process, the aim is to balance the demands of current and future developments with the need to protect marine ecosystems and achieve development objectives in a transparent way. Within MSP, the aim is that good governance should be based on recognition of all the interests of all stakeholders and inclusion of these interests where possible. In the EU context, while MSP has been well developed, primarily due to the MSP directive in 2014, in the Eastern Caribbean, MSP is actually just picking up on a large scale. Just last year in December, there were 5 plants produced in the Eastern Caribbean region. So can MSP address marine pollution? Well, like I said, this is very much an emerging area of research. So essentially, what I will present today is research within the last couple of years, 2019 to 2020. The frameworks I will talk about have been published just in project reports, and as yet there has not been much in academic literature. So the main challenge with marine pollution and why it is difficult to consider in MSP is due to the nature of pollutants themselves. Pollutants, such as marine debris, traverse the boundaries of both land and sea and move across maritime borders as well and do not have clear spatial boundaries. And thus they are challenging to work with in an area-based management tool such as MSP. In fact, some researchers are saying that maybe we should not be attempting to, or that marine spatial planning cannot address pollution or other such challenges in this way. So a recent report which came out just last year from the ICZM MSP working group notes that not all issues can be addressed through the spatial and temporal allocation of space, and that management challenges such as pollution requires additional policies or standards to reduce overall impact intensity, spatial coverage, and temporal occurrence. So for example, the regulations and laws that would be applied at the regional level or through organizations such as the IMO. But in other quarters, researchers, particularly those applying a broad systems thinking approach, have suggested that MSP can be part of a wider or larger framework of tools or approaches that can be used to address pollution, including marine litter. So one such framework is Glancy Interactions, and this framework was published in 2020 and came out of a project which looked at how the concept of Glancy interaction could be considered in MSP. This has been quite a hot topic and of interest to researchers and practitioners since it appeared in the EU MSP directive, and there was some uncertainty as to about what it really meant. So the framework itself, which looks a bit complex here in this infographic, and the definition is just as complex, but I will try to summarize it. It essentially says that land interactions are the complex and dynamic interactions through which land-based biogeochemical processes, socioeconomic activities, and governance arrangements present opportunities and risks to the marine environment, and vice versa, meaning that the same components also present opportunities and risks to the terrestrial environment. So within this framework, waste, which encompasses marine debris, is listed as a key issue to be addressed in MSP. So this framework actually recognized that maybe we can address waste in MSP. So as LSIs encompass these complex and dynamic interrelationships between socioeconomic activities, biogeochemical processes, and governance arrangements across both land and sea, the thinking is that a territorial planning approach must be applied, where there are opportunities to address the issue through governance arrangements across land and sea. The authors or developers of this framework do note that MSP has relatively limited opportunities to effectively deal with LSI issues on its own. And so working in isolation will not solve this problem or help the issue. And so it must be within the remit of an integrated governance approach. The other framework is based on the concept of the source to sea system, which was developed out of the Stockholm International Water Institute in 2019. So essentially, a source-to-sea system covers the entire area from the river basin down to the open ocean. The system can also be defined at a larger scale to include a sea and its entire drainage area, which may include several river basins. So the system is linked through 6 key flows, which include pollutants and other materials such as marine debris. Based on the source-to-sea system, they have put forward a framework for marine litter prevention, which highlights the central role of the river basin in preventing marine litter. Current approaches to reducing marine litter address individual symptoms of the problem, making such approaches ill-suited for addressing root causes. Essentially, what the source-to-sea framework aims to do is to move away from this by bringing all actors within the system together and widening the perspective to include upstream and downstream linkages and promoting coordination between public authorities responsible for management across land, water, and marine spaces. So how does MSP fit into all of this? As a holistic management approach, the source-to-sea framework can be integrated with existing approaches such as integrated water resources management, coastal zone management, and marine spatial planning, and can link these approaches together. At least this is the thinking of the development of this framework and how it would work across land and sea. So in conclusion, just some concluding comments and to summarize, marine pollution is difficult to address in MSP due to the indeterminate spatial and temporal nature of waste and marine debris. I think even if we are seeking to try or to find concrete ways of addressing the issue of pollution in MSP, there remains the question of how far can MSP within its remit as operating within the marine space address this problem, which is essentially a wider scale problem than MSP typically addresses. As the frameworks of LSI and source-to-sea show, MSP as a complementary tool to other approaches such as land planning and ICCM may be useful in a coordinated approach to addressing marine pollution and marine debris issues. But how exactly this is to be done is still to be determined because, like I said earlier on, this is still very much an emerging area of research. And as MSP evolves and as we learn more about pollutants, waste, debris, perhaps we can find more tangible ways of addressing the challenge of marine waste. That's it from me. If you want to learn more about these conceptual frameworks, I have the references. And I now pass over to Professor Schofield for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah, but I'd also like to thank all of our participants, our presenters thus far, to Leke, Roxanne, Tricia, Crystal. Thank you ever so much for a fantastic, diverse array of presentations on which is befitting a complex and multifaceted issue. There are a number of questions that have come up in the Q&A that I'd like to address. And first I'd like to invite Andrei Poljak to ask his question, which as a geographer myself, I'm delighted to invite him to ask since I'm a geographer, and his question relates to scale. Andrei, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you all for those beautiful presentations. Very interesting indeed. This question goes both to Crystal and Roxy. I've seen and understood that the power of the scale is very influential in both of your researches. So I was wondering what insights you might have about broader scale regimes, such as convention treaties. How fit are they to the Caribbean reality, and how do you see this improving? Thank you.
Crystal, I could go first.
Please.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Hi, Andre. So thank you for your question. Well, my research actually seeks to answer this question. I, of course, have my own biases. And when talking with experts in Grenada, where I'm from at least, some of them would say that they feel like this interregional collaboration is more like the North, once again, telling us what to do without finding out the perspectives of, the varying sectors in our country and ignoring our culture. Simple things like the way we preserve our clothing compared to the developed world, or the way we reuse our plastic bags, bottles, containers, or things that don't get, much attention and certainly aren't written in the scientific literature. In Bermuda, for instance, there's this NGO that formulated a way to monitor marine debris in certain hotspots. And just last year, the government actually stopped their plans and efforts in its track to tell them they need to follow OSPA's arrangement with the wider Caribbean region. So essentially, I would like to know if these, top-down approaches are really best, because I think it depends on the country. But like I said, it's all part of my current investigation.
Very good. Anyone else in the panel who would like to respond to that question of scalar approaches?
No, I think Roxanne, you hit the nail on the head with that. And
Very good.
I think as relates to regional scales, conventions and treaties, they look great on paper, and they can be a great framework for the region. But when you bring it down to the localized level, a lot of it falls back onto capacity that exists to execute such treaties, and also execution and enforcement of such treaties. And Roxanne brought up some really good points about how culturally and locally there are ways that we do manage waste or different things that aren't representative of what's reflected in such treaties. So I think we need more on the ground approaches that reflect the guidance that's elaborated in these treaties.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed for those answers. I'd now like to call, if I may, on Edgar Cabrera. My apologies for my pronunciation. Edgar, could you unmute and join the conversation? And I believe you have at least a comment in relation to the Tropical Atlantic and Caribbean regional initiatives.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much, and congratulations to all of you. I was really surprised and in a very positive and glad to see all this WMO new engagement, let's say, to the traditional WMO work. So I am a physical oceanographer and a former WMO head of the Marines program. And I am now supporting this regional planning group set by IO Caribe, the IO Caribe of UNESCO. I'm glad that you mentioned that, and also the Cartagena Convention. And in the last 2 years, there was several efforts in the framework of this Ocean Decade of Science, a series of workshops leading all the seven working groups on clean ocean, healthy ocean, predicted ocean, safe ocean, sustainable ocean, transparent and accessible ocean, and capacity development. So this led us to a kickoff conference in December 2021, coordinated by the IOC of UNESCO, IO Caribe office, and with the participation of all agencies and working in the Caribbean. And a set of proposals were submitted to the Ocean Decade Call of Action. One of them was on the ocean pollution, on marine pollution, ocean observatory, and also on the capacity development. So I will encourage you to work with IO Caribe and also IO Caribe to work with you, because this is a very common and strong partnerships that we need to build. So thank you very much. This was my comment. And on this clean ocean, the part of the pollutant observatory was detected, but on the safe ocean, the integrated coastal multi-hazard early warning system, the Sargassum, was one of the topics that were also included. So congratulations to you, and glad to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Edgar. the next question, it comes from Flora Lim. Flora, would you like to ask it directly, or I'm happy to read it out?
You may read it out. Okay,
thank you very much. Well, and I think this is a question that Roxanne has, I think Crystal has already addressed to some extent in the chat. But the issue really in this question from Flora is how much of the litter or marine litter or debris can be attributed to shipping and particularly the cruise industry. And I think the answer is a little bit of a hard question to answer. Crystal, would you care to comment?
Yeah, so traditionally the statistic has been that 80% of marine debris is generated from a land-based source, and that remaining 20% comes from sea-based sources, inclusive of shipping and fishing activities. Now, as it relates to how much of that is specific to the cruise ship industry, I don't have a stat on that, and I don't know how much work is being done on that in particular, but that one is a little bit more tricky because the indiscriminate release of waste from cruise ships is not just plastic, but it's also solid waste, waste that comes from the sewage systems or their water treatment, and also leaving waste at ports in small island developing states who don't have the capacity to deal with it. So I think that one's a little bit more nuanced and it requires some more research.
I think that's of course that tends to be the answer from most universities, that there's a need for more research. But I think that you're absolutely spot on in this particular question. Now we've got about 15 minutes left, so I do have probably time to squeeze in questions for those who haven't had a question directed at them yet. And I'd particularly like to ask this question of my colleague, Dr. Aleke Stoffner-Bryan, because he has a unique insight of having just been part of the negotiations towards the new Global Plastics Treaty, but also as the PI for this particular project. How do you see this project, Closing the Circle project, actually fitting into those global level developments? Aleke, please.
Thank you, Professor Schofield. That's a very challenging question, but I think that first of all, last week, it was a very positive sign that the resolution was passed informally 2 days before the deadline. So there's a lot of will. And something that the parties agreed on was that the international treaty would support a life cycle approach to plastic. So not only end of life waste management, but to really start at the beginning and to look at circular economy responses and resource efficiency responses. However, the small island developing states in the region that we're looking at have issues of economies of scale. How do you implement circular economy systems in small islands that are scattered quite far away from each other? And I think this is a really interesting way how we can try to understand that. Roxanne mentioned it, Crystal mentioned it, we can find local solutions that fit into these kind of more broad global responses. And I think this is exactly where the international community needs to think about how to integrate these local and national considerations rather than outlining fancy big plans that might only be completed by the global north. So this is where we can contribute both by highlighting research gaps, knowledge gaps, but also specific opportunities like mentioned by Roxanne. And I really, Roxanne, enjoy that you are a bit against the system and say, no, we need to maybe reconsider how things are being done right now, to also reflect the reality in these island nations. And I think the small island developing states are a barometer of the efficiency of international law and to see how we can effectively address that. And in that, the means of implementation that has to be envisaged by the international community is key. And this is where we can also with our research play an important role to highlight what these islands are needing. So I'm looking forward to a lot more work. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Aleke. I think I got just enough time to squeeze in a question for each of our presenters in turn. And so firstly, Roxanne, you already talked about scalar issues, and I'm glad to hear that. But you did also mention you had a treasure chest at your disposal. So I'd like you to open that if you can and pick out what you think is the most apt management intervention or mechanism that actually you feel has most likelihood of working on the ground in small island developing states.
That's a huge question there. Like I said,
well,
it's very...
well, you've got at least a minute to answer it.
Okay, so it's I would definitely say it's very much country specific. And yes, I did talk about this treasure chest via the clearinghouse mechanism, right? And I was essentially just using that as a way forward in which the South-to-South cooperation, which is mostly, based on environment and not particularly, marine litter specific. So we can learn from each other, right? But like I said, it is definitely dependent on the country, their priorities, their geopolitical status. It's a huge question to answer, and it will take some time to certainly break down. But I believe,
thank you, Roxanne.
Like
you have a whole PhD to deliver the answer, but we're happily.
Thank you for your question.
Thank you. Now, Crystal, you, if I can turn to you, you emphasized, I think, in your presentation, the gaps in the monitoring and how much of it is done on a non-governmental basis, on a local civil society initiative basis. Now, it seems to me through this program, we seem to be discovering a new mechanism or a new group or a new research that is centered on marine litter, but also the Eastern Caribbean region frequently. There's an awful lot going on in this space. In your view, are there initiatives that are actually addressing these gaps? And frankly, are national governments able to step up, as it were, and address this monitoring issue? Do you see signs of progress?
I think there's definitely progress that has been made over the years, with more of the efforts being put on the upstream solutions, which is important, right? From the production to the distribution of plastics into the marine environment, through all the policies and conventions. All of that is great, but doesn't necessarily address the downstream impacts of marine debris and the transboundary movements of once it lands onto the shores. How often is it landing there? Where is it coming from? And does it stay there? Are we going to remove it from the environment? So I think there needs to be a balance placed on both the up and downstream approaches to managing this issue. Because even if we put in all these laws and policies into place, it's not going to take away the plastic that's still circulating. Like I mentioned, the legacy plastics that are still washing up. So that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. The way in which these plastics washing up are decades old is really quite alarming and frightening. Tricia, you mentioned the geopolitical complexity of the Caribbean region. How does that complexity of the region and and this goes to a question that I'll ask for Sarah in a moment, the way in which some of the maritime boundaries are agreed, and there's been progress there, and some are simply underlimited or are in dispute. How does that aspect of it impact on the governance initiatives that you're talking about to deal with abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear?
Okay, I think at the end I didn't get the last part of your question.
Oh, really? How it relates to the governance initiatives to deal with ALDFG?
Okay. Yeah. So the issues of undetermined boundaries is a challenge, yes, but I think within the context of the region that we're working, because there has been this commitment towards regional cooperation, it may not be as significant an issue. I did want to kind of go back to the issue of scale, however, because one of the things that is recognizable when we're dealing with an issue of like ALDFG, where you do have these global conventions that are basically many of the countries within the region are signatory to. The issue is whether or not they're even applicable to small scale fisheries, because one, a lot of times some of the measures are not even, they apply to, for instance, vessels that are over 24 meters, where 90% of your fleet is 24 meters or less. So how does that reconcile with this trying to apply these global measures? And so I think for an issue like ALDFG, where there is still so much unknown about the causes, the scale, the scope, within the context of small scale fisheries, it is first and foremost the need for more research. That cannot be understated. And second, the issue of, with all this geopolitical complexity, with all these agencies kind of working, sometimes with competing mandates, really, how do we get policy coherence with all the various policies that govern marine debris generally, and then bringing that down to the issue of ALDFG specifically. And I think Roxanne kind of highlighted that issue very, very well. Finally, for an issue where you're talking about small scale fisheries specifically, I think what is going to be critical is the role of industry, because government alone cannot tackle the issue, unfortunately, because a lot of, particularly as I've highlighted in my presentation, a lot of the countries that we're dealing with, they're highly indebted. They have very little fiscal space to be able to effectively manage such an issue without industry playing some sort of role, and the role of partnership. And there needs to be some kind of partnership between government and industry, at least within these smaller islands. I did want to kind of pick up, however, on one question that was posted in the chat by Maria Rhoda Williams, where she did ask about who reports these gears, if they're being reported. The first thing is, for a lot of the countries, there is no specific requirement that this gear be reported, at least the states that I'm working with. There are a lot of the reporting that happens has been generally affiliated with assessments related to storms. So if we do have a large tropical system, the national agency may request information about what damage and loss did you suffer as a result of the storm. But generally speaking, if you lose a trap, there is no requirement in legislation that that trap or net or line be reported as lost. And so that is the first issue. So it really would be a voluntary thing for these small scale fishers to take upon themselves and call the agency. And a lot of times those reports are only if they assume that the trap has been stolen. So
thank you, Tricia, and thank you for picking up Mariah's question. I had noticed it, but thank you for being efficient in that regard. Finally, Sarah, we're not leaving you lonesome at the end. Sort of two interrelated questions for you. You concentrated on project reports in your presentation, indicated that there was a dearth of academic literature, but do you see signs that that's changing? Because there has been an explosion of literature on marine spatial planning generally. Are there positive signs there? And one question we had from a colleague, Aspasia, was, oh, you're dealing with transboundary marine spatial planning, but many of the boundaries aren't there yet. How do you deal with that?
Great, thanks for both questions, Clive. Well, yeah, there's very little in the literature, particularly related to pollution. What I did see was there was one short communication. So that's where we're at. No full academic articles, but a short communication on the potential of MSP for addressing pollution in shipping. And essentially, to summarize in one sentence, what the authors were sort of throwing out there for further research was that maybe there is some complementarity between MSP and the PSSA regime. I could share the link to that paper in the chat for viewers and listeners. But it wasn't a paper, it was just a short communication that requires more research. And that has been the extent of what I've seen specifically for MSP. Regarding the question on the transboundary MSP, yes, it's true. It's in the Eastern Caribbean, we have as much as 10 boundaries, which are still pending. It's been primarily a capacity issue and not so much due to disputes. So there are claims and not so many disputes. Well, essentially what countries are doing, they're not doing transboundary MSP yet, but they're working across borders on transboundary issues in projects. So I would say the first step is to get those boundaries delimited, and then we can have the legal certainty in transboundary planning.
Yeah, fantastic answer, Sarah. Thank you. It just at this stage it's for me to say thank you very much to the IMO Oceans Group for the opportunity. Thank you for a tremendous series of presentations. We very much appreciate them. Thank you for the participants for their all their questions and listening to us today. And I'd now like to pass the baton to close out to Professor Ronan Long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clive. And I'd say to all our colleagues here at the Sasakawa Global Ocean Institute at the World Maritime University, congratulations. A really stimulating and wonderful presentation. I'd also like to say that I've sailed extensively in the Windward and Leeward Islands, and it's one of the most beautiful parts of the world. And when we were researching this particular program a number of years back, I was quite struck by the World Bank finding that the incidence of marine debris and plastic pollution in particular was 3 times the global average in the Eastern Caribbean. I thought that was quite striking. And secondly, of course, we have cumulative effects, particularly Sargassum, and that's a very important strand of our research. We haven't addressed that directly today at this webinar, but if you join in Dominica virtually, we have a whole panel addressing Sargassum. The third issue, I suppose, is the issue of storm debris, and that's very, very extensive. And that with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think are prisms which we have to address the wider socioeconomic issues in the Caribbean, of course. And Caribbean is highly dependent on tourism and cruise tourism, so it needs a pristine marine environment. Here at the World Maritime University, we're doing our bit in terms of capacity building. And I think everybody that has joined us from across the world sees the nature and scope and indeed the great talent here at the university, first and foremost within our student body, but also ably supported by faculty and staff. We would not be able to deliver this program without considerable support from our partners within the region. I've mentioned CERMES, OECS, CARICOM, UNEP, IOC, UNESCO, and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank as very important partners for the delivery of this program, as well as the member states of the OECS and indeed civil society organizations. Here at the university, of course, we're led by a very dynamic leader, the president of the university from Dominica, Dr. Cleopatra Dumbia Henry, and of course, we're very proud that she's captain of the ship. Lastly, before I turn the floor over perhaps to Andrew, I'd like to acknowledge the extraordinary backroom team we have here at the Institute and indeed in the university. By name, Elna's Jill, Mercedes, Flora, and of course, Maya, and all our IT colleagues within the university that have supported the delivery of this webinar. And of course, we're a child of the IMO, so we are very honored to deliver this with the IMO Oceans Group. Our dear colleague, Frederick Haag, is at the BBNJ negotiations at UNHQ, and we'll be doing a seminar, a virtual webinar on that particular topic in due course. So without further ado, I think Andrew, would you like to say a few words before we ask everybody to switch on their cameras and we can give you all a collective wave? And we would say, I suppose, a very warm good day to our alumni across the world. And I see lots of you have been sending messages to me by email or indeed there on the chat. So we're going to have a homecoming next year for our alumni, and we will be reaching out to you in due course in relation to that. That's me. So Andrew, please.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you for those kind words about the IMO. And just finally, on behalf of the IMO, and particularly on behalf of the IMO Ocean Group, I just really want to express my sincere thanks to everyone, all the speakers and presenters that have been in the webinar today. Found it excellent, really informative, and highlighting the wealth of work that's ongoing in the Eastern Caribbean region to address and reduce the pressures from marine litter. And I'm sure all the colleagues from around the world who've been on the webinar today have felt that as well. And as we've heard a number of times, very timely and very important research. And here, where I work, we're the Secretariat for a global convention. So the capacity building is so important, and we do that through regional down to state level. But we heard today that the work that's ongoing in the Caribbean region has really the knowledge and the recommendations to strengthen that knowledge base on this issue is really important, and it can feed back in so much the other way, particularly in relation to this issue and the new global treaty that is going to be developed on plastics. So great. I mean, this is the second webinar that has been hosted by the Institute and the WMU, and I've found them absolutely fantastic. Some of the best webinars I've been in, and I think we've all been in lots of webinars over the past 2 years, but these really stand out. And so I'd just like to say again, thank you to Ronan there and all your team at the WMU and within the Institute. I've found it fascinating, and I'm sure lots of people will be looking at this again online and going over it. Thank you.
I think everybody can wave now, Andrew, and thank you and your colleagues. We wish you a very nice day, and likewise a very good evening to our colleagues in Asia, good afternoon to our colleagues in Africa, and a very early morning to our colleagues in the Eastern Caribbean and indeed the Americas, as well as further afield in the Pacific. Alice, can we switch on the cameras for everybody so we can collectively wave goodbye?
That's unfortunately not possible with the webinar. Only the panelists can be seen.
Okay, maybe
but
the
we
panelists
can wave on behalf of them.
Can we switch to the panelists to wave goodbye?
Yes, they're all on.
But we're seeing the title, sort of the thank you screen on that.
Ah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.